So good evening, everyone. This is Jude back again with another Cosmic Cuppa with Jude. Tonight I have lovely Carolyn Rae Searle with me, and we're going to be finding out a little bit more about her life and her passions in life. So, hi Carolyn Rae, how are you?
Hi Jude, I'm great, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to be with you too. And we had a lovely chat a few afternoons back, and you gave me some lovely intel to add to what we're going to be doing tonight. So with your permission, I'd love to read out your bio to start with.
Okay.
So Carolyn Rae is a health practitioner, has a passion for customer service, a natural and energy medicine worker, empowering people to nurture and heal themselves with nutritional, herbal, and energy medicine. She comes from a self-sufficient, rural, organic background that includes hunting and fishing, milking dairy cows for home use, farming dry stock, breeding and training horses, and horse whispering with wild Kaimanawa horses, which are New Zealand horses for those that aren't familiar with the Kaimanawa range horses. She has grown trees as woodlots for conservation and production on a small-scale plantation and grown herbs extensively. Born in the 50s, was raised in a boating family, afraid of water, and living on the Tamaki Estuary, which she tells me was in the city, in the North Island of New Zealand. In her early life, she was often left in charge of running the household and regularly caring for the younger siblings. This created a foundation of skills and responsibility for others. As an adult, following a successful career, moving to the activities of a rural lifestyle provided a natural progression into the field of natural and energy medicine, which has been the sole focus of her life since the 90s. Her combination of skill, knowledge, and interest in apothecary and use of a unique product range, including her own, continues to lead to extraordinary results in people and animals' lives. Some of her influences include her grandmother, her dance teacher, Findhorn, Poshy Cat, meeting Juliet de Bercali Levy. Now, I might not be saying that quite correctly. Apparently, she is a well-known herbalist. Sri Amma Bhagavan, her son William. She has had personal health issues and multiple head and spinal injuries. She has learnt the body talk system and connects with the divine universal intelligence. She says, "My life has always been about service and healing. It's who I am," with a desire to bring harmony and balance to every state of being, and an innate desire to help or heal. Her background includes raising a family, including her siblings, farming and horticulture, a chestnut nursery, orchard production, woodlot plantations, livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, chicken, and you've got fitch. Is that as in birds, Carolyn Rae?
No, they're a small animal, like a ferret.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that.
It's a commercial name for ferrets.
Ah, horse breeding. Rescue of Kaimanawa wild horses. Self-sufficient gardening. Vegetables and extensive herb collections. Landscaping. Horse whispering and equine Bowen therapy. Experience with natural health therapies. Qualifications certified in natural and complementary medicine. Homeopathy. Herbal medicine. Therapeutic massage and aromatherapy, including the raindrop technique. Energy healing, touch for health 1 and 2. Light therapy, colour therapy. Aurosoma, colour healing, level 1, 2 and 3. The Body Talk system modules 1, 2, 3, 5, 7 and 9. Mindscape, Acunet healing system, level 1 and 2. Healing touch, level 1 and 2. Animal communication and healing. Healing touch for canines. Healing touch for equines. Aromatherapy animal specialist training with the essential oils, Vet USA. Whole energy body balance training, the Healing Vet USA, Australia. Clinic and naturopathic nutrition experience. Served as a chapter leader for the Western A Price Foundation. Her spiritual development is ongoing and includes visiting Oneness University, India, now known as ECOM, the Oneness Field. Developed a concept for a humanitarian project for a healing centre called The Field. Is currently available with 3 prayer groups and building a successful online health and wellbeing business that empowers others on their wellbeing journey, along with their financial wellbeing, which is so satisfying and rewarding. Her creational favourites are gardening, handcrafts, being in nature, research, a movie, quality time with special friends, and known to sing occasionally, which I think is lovely because I've heard you sing, Carolyn Rae. You have a beautiful voice.
Thank you, Jude.
So welcome to our Cosmic Cuppa. So I wonder if we could start with you telling us, please, what it was like for you growing up as a child and speak of your life in your earlier years.
They were probably difficult years, mostly. My mother was widowed when I was a baby at 18 months. And till about the age of 5, that was our family, just her and I. And it was difficult for her. And this was a time when there was no domestic purposes benefit. There was a small widow's allowance, but it wasn't enough to live on. So with anyone with a young child, that was pretty challenging. She had to go out to work and try and farm me off on whoever would look after me, and that was just out of a means to an end. Eventually, she stopped doing that and actually took in a few boarders. And so for a little while, we had a succession of nice gentlemen come and live at our house. And one of them was an Englishman that became a very old family friend. And he had a good friend called Sandy, and eventually my mother married him. So then the family grew on from there. But those early years, initially we lived in the country on a farm. I don't have many memories of that, but it made an indelible memory impression on me. And that's living on the land, I think, really resonated with me. That was a happy time. And it was somewhere where I could get lost with the animals, I suppose. But my mother's home was in the city. So we eventually had to move there, and that was when she just had to try and make a living the best she could. One of the earliest memories I had of that time was as a child playing in the garden with a friend who was quite a bit older than me. And I was, probably like most preschoolers, quite self-expressed. And we had a discrepancy about something. I don't remember what, but I didn't like it. And I swore at her. In those days, I used a word that was considered a swear word, but I just called her a bugger, and I said, "You're a bugger." And in my mother's house, she did not swear, and that was sacrilege. And she went and told on me. And the punishment was you got your mouth washed out with soap. And when you're just a 4-year-old with, a large woman's hand down your throat with a bar of soap, it wasn't pleasant. And I was so incensed with having to, just deal with all that. I went back outside and I told my friend she was a damn bugger for telling on me. And she told on me again. And the punishment was next time you'll get your mouth washed out with soap powder. So I know my mother didn't mean to be abusive or anything, but in these days they would call it abuse probably. But I made a decision at that age that it's not safe to speak up. And that kind of shaped who I was for many years. Just being seen and not heard, always being good, always being appropriate. And that gets you so far in life, but it's not authentic, and it's quite a difficult place to be happy from. So it took quite some years to jump through that hurdle.
I think in a way it was the times that you and I both grew up in, where everything had to be seen to be not maybe perfect, but of a moral standing that didn't always suit the individual. And I remember having my mouth washed out with soap as well. It's not nice. No. Especially when you knew on the whole you were a pretty good kid, and we weren't perfect. We made mistakes, but it seemed to be the way it was back then. And
it definitely was, yeah.
To shape you in a way that you felt you couldn't speak, Carolyn Rae, that's pretty tough, isn't it?
Because she was very strict, so I had a lot of fear with her, and it was always my life was always about trying to get her approval. And it took me till probably I was in my 50s when I finally got it one day that I was never going to get it. Not in the way I expected to get it. I had to actually approve of myself first.
Well, it seems like you did that because you were talking about having to look after younger siblings as well. Was that from your mum's second marriage?
Yes, they came along afterwards. And I mean, in those times I thought that's just what you had to do because I was the eldest, and I was always praised for doing it well. So that was about all I was praised for, so that's what I thought you had to do. So I set out to do it as well as I could, hoping I would get that approval. I just kind of kept getting more of the same all the way through. And it wasn't until I actually grew up that I realized I never learned to play. It was all right for them to, but somehow it wasn't for me. So I just became the responsible one. Yeah.
Interesting how that often happens with the eldest, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that
Mm,
was to be expected, and in big families, I think that still happens.
yes,
But I think, yeah, well-meaning parents, they do the best with the tools they had, without realizing it's not exactly well-rounded. Yeah.
true,
So
true.
so being playful was, yeah, not a place I learnt easily.
Hmm, bless your heart. Could you please speak about your time on a rural farm? How did this manifest being self-sufficient? And what projects did you get involved with? And how many were employed to help you within these projects?
Um, well, that came about much later, after I used to have a business, a small business in town, and uh, my husband at the time and I moved out of town, and we got a property, a small property. It was only 30 acres, but it was in a large farming area, an area of very large farms. So we were a very small property in comparison to 1,000-acre properties. And so that was the dream, was to be self-sufficient. So it was bare land that we just started from scratch. We lived nearby, and eventually we moved a house onto it, renovated the house. We did extensive planting of woodlots, plantations, and that was when we developed the chestnut orchard, starting off with a nursery, growing our own woodstock, doing our own grafting, planting our own orchards, and various things like that in terms of growing. So it was about plantations for timber production and food production, as well as just beautifying it and just attracting as much wildlife as possible, putting in a few ponds, things like that, and just trying to make investments for the future and with different types of woodlots. And just running a bit of dry stock, because it was a hill country area. The neat thing about that was we were very close to a national forest. That was, just like very close, like one property away. And that gave me places to ride, which is something that I loved. And those years were really, when in reflection, quite a privilege living that lifestyle. Yeah, it was very, very satisfying in many ways.
Yes. Can you tell me about you spoke about some of the trees you grew. You're talking about chestnuts. What did you do with the chestnuts? Were they sold or used for
Well,
food or?
the market for chestnuts to this day is still quite small in New Zealand, but in Europe, it's very established, and in Asia. So they've had established, orchards for food production in those parts of the world. They're very much a tradition, especially in the colder months. They're one nut that doesn't produce much oil. They're all carbohydrate. So they're a very warming winter food. They're great for stuffings, for making sweets, just as a vegetable. They have a very short shelf life. So if you're ever buying chestnuts, usually when they have a label on them that says fresh, they're not. Simply not. They only have a few days shelf life. But if you know how to store them, like in water, in a fridge, they'll keep for quite a number of weeks, and you can freeze them. So occasionally you might see them here in a peeled form in the freezer department, but mostly it's a European market or a Japanese market. So in those days, it was pretty much experimental for the area we were in. And I remember applying for a special grant because we were an experimental orchard. So, that was quite a process. I'd never done anything like that before. So put in a submission and got it approved. And that started us off with the whole funding. I think we had it for about 5 years. They take about 5 years to actually become productive. So we never got to a stage where we had masses of volume that we could export, but that was, what everybody was very much a fledgling industry in New Zealand at that point in time.
That's
wonderful. So it was all building on from there, and there was still a market for young trees, and supplying those. And it was also experimental in terms of shelter belts that we had to grow, because all the surrounding properties were all dry stock, and not many of them grew shelter belts. It was a hill country area. There wasn't really that much need, but for horticulture, it's good to have shelter belts. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. You spoke of self-sufficient gardening with vegetables, herbs, and landscaping. Would you talk about this, please, and your understanding of Findhorn? And did this play a major role in your gardens and the way you set them out?
Very, very much that particular property. As I say, we'd lived in the area quite a number of years nearby before we owned our own property. And I think I just read about Findhorn one day and it totally captivated me. And I was already having these challenges, like we had bare land with no real water source on it. There were a few little creeks, but not a lot. So I was having to just rely on rainfall. We did have quite a good rainfall because it was hill country, but trying to get, new gardens and all these new plantings established with no sprinkler system or anything. And around the house site as well, it had been bulldozed with all the topsoil removed, and it was just clay. And I was trying to make new gardens in hard clay. So I was having to create all this organic matter and plant things that were nursery trees for other things coming on. So it was all very much trial and error, just finding ways of just continually mulching and trying to protect the small things to get to a stage where they could stand alone on, without any water supply. And it was about that time that I read about Findhorn and how they had, transformed this barren, windswept terrain with the same kind of conditions, but probably far worse than what I was dealing with, because we weren't coastal, we were hill country. But just tuning into the divas and getting the divas working for you. Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about that process that you went through? Because this is exciting stuff for anyone that wants to get going with their gardening with finding it difficult.
I think I don't know that it was still very, it wasn't really anything I talked about very much. It was, because a lot of people, I was right into planting by the moon. My husband wasn't. We had many arguments about it. He just thought it was a load of nonsense. Just stick them in the ground and that was it. And I was very much wanting to work with the rhythms, those natural rhythms. So the concept of working with divas was just an extension of that. And I probably kept a lot of it to myself. I just did it. And I just started talking to the plants, to whatever spirits I thought might be there or hoped were there, and just called in what I could without being terribly aware, because at that time I wasn't that spiritually aware. But it was just like an inner guidance system at that point that guided me, I think. And as things grew and kind of garden rooms got created in the garden and further out on the property, and like my garden was always expanding. And after my husband had to move the fence the third time, he informed me that enough was enough, and my garden was big enough. It was a few acres by this stage, but as trees grow, you know, you start running out of space. And I would come up with more and more ideas, and I was just totally engrossed in what I could grow. Just could not get enough of it. And I would go to any garden and look at what they were doing and what was working for them and not working for them, and follow other, you know, new growers who were doing things that were exciting to me. So I was always wanting to spread my wings, so to speak, and make it happen on my little plot. Yeah.
I can imagine. What sort of herbs did you pop in there, Carolyn Rae?
Oh, too numerous to mention. I had also about that time become involved in using homeopathy for ourselves, just for my family, and a bit of aromatherapy. So they've been long-term passions, long before I learned anything formally about those subjects. But medicinal herbs were the other thing. I liked using them to cook with, but I also was very attracted to what I might be able to do with them medicinally. So mostly it was just, I was just into the whole planting thing. I used to, I had very long hair in those days, down kind of my elbows, and trying to keep, you know, this unruly hair, because my hair is, when it's long like that, is really long and wavy and very bushy. And I was always outside, so it was always a bit unruly. So I would tie it up or plait it or something. But when I washed my hair, I was always looking for conditioners and things that would work. And I started going out in the garden and just intuiting what my body or my hair might need. And then I would take it and, you know, pick a bunch of things and then brew them up in the kitchen and make a rinse for my hair. So people started noticing that, you know, how come I had nice shiny hair? And it was just all these herbal rinses that I would create. And, you know, and I would do things like that with my cooking. Everyone seemed to like to come and eat at my place. And I was used to cooking for a lot of people. You know, we would often have lots of friends come to visit. People seem to think because you lived in the country, you might be lonely. So that they would want to come and visit. So it just meant actually a lot more work because you had to feed them all.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the questions I think I asked was, did you have other people helping you on your property?
No.
So that was full time on the job.
Oh yeah, yeah.
On the job
it's
training.
Pretty much, you're it. Yeah.
Now you talk about rooms. Can you explain to people what you mean by garden rooms?
A garden room is, you would have experienced a garden room often if you go to a park, often in a park, you know, just like Hagley Park, for example, they'll call something the such and such lawn or something, and it will be an area of lawn, but there'll be a shrubbery around that. So I sort of had places like that, only on a much smaller scale. I had one large area, which was 2 levels of lawn. And my garden was actually in a gully, what used to be a little gully that originally was filled with blackberry. And we had all that blackberry removed when we chose it as a house site. The house was actually put on the top side of the gully. But I made lots of stairways down into the gully, and the bottom area was all created into a large lawn on 2 different levels. And all the sides of that gully became terraces of garden. So initially, like one of those big bankings was covered in the waste from a calf rearing shed. So calf rearing sheds were often, they would fill the floor with perhaps old sawdust, and the calves would be reared on those, on that floor. I call it a floor because sometimes it was just dirt with, deep sawdust put on top of it. But by the end of the season, when the calves had all, they finished the rearing process of weaning them, that would all be taken out and dumped. But it was full of manure. So it became great compost. So
Yes.
I was always on the scrounge for things like that. And I would, in anyone that lived nearby that had a facility that raised calves, I would be asking for their manure. Anyone that had, I'm still to this day, anyone I know who has a lot of, say, stables, for example, they have to dig them out. And there's always good, healthy compost as a result. So you just garner it from wherever you can. So I covered a big banking like that. The first crop I put in on that banking, somebody gifted me a trailer load of dahlia bulbs. And dahlia bulbs are a bit like potatoes. They're really good for breaking the ground in. And within one season, I had beautiful friable soil just from the work those dahlia bulbs had done.
That's interesting.
They provided a great nursery to help protect other shrubs that I was collecting, and I would, plant them amongst it, and slowly created little areas that I would call rooms out of that. And some of them were really, really private and kind of they became quite special little places that you could go and sit and contemplate. Yeah.
Sounds idyllic. I wished I could have seen it. It sounds beautiful. So you're learning about herbs, you're putting in more plants. You also had dairy cattle, I believe. You were telling me you had Jersey cows, but for private use.
Three Jersey cows. Yeah, they were beautiful, beautiful cows. And they had calves at foot. So we would always have a nurse, they were all what you would call nurse cows. And sometimes you can mother on an extra calf, so they're feeding two calves, and that becomes another bit of revenue for the property because you can grow that animal on later.
Yes.
But if you want the milk for yourself, you just withhold the calves overnight, and you milk what you need in the morning, and then let the calves have what's left. Yeah.
Well, I've got to say, and I mentioned to you the other day when we were speaking, that my most favourite milk is the Jersey cow milk, and the cream is so thick you can hardly pour it out of the pot.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, I remember those days too. Nothing like it.
Yeah, you can make your own butter and yogurts and cheeses. Yeah.
So you had quite an industry going in many varied areas at that time, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was lots more than that too. Yeah.
When did you first start becoming interested in horses? And how did you develop the breeding and training of them, including the Kaimanawa stock?
I think the interest in horses started when I was at school, but living in a boating family, that was a no-no. Every weekend, the family always went away on the boat, and that was the recreation. There was certainly no time, let alone funds, for keeping a horse. But my best friend at school had a horse. So whenever I could, I would go and hang out with her. And I'd be on my bike and she'd be on her horse. And I'd be riding along trying to keep up with the horse. And every now and then she'd give me a little ride. And one of our favourite things was because we lived in South Auckland, which was near a lot of beaches. So we would often ride out to one of the beaches and go for a swim with the horse, sometimes meet other young kids that had horses as well. So that was just the ultimate for me, you know, and it just had this, I just always had this longing. No matter how much I nagged my mother, I was given many good reasons why that was never going to happen. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I finally got my own first horse. The breeding came later. I was probably in my late 20s by then, I think, or no, it might have been even later than that. Yeah, probably in my 30s before we started doing that. And I got very, very interested in endurance riding. And a lot of endurance rides were actually held in my area. So this was something that I could do that didn't, you know, I didn't have to truck a horse many miles because I loved hunting. I was completely captivated with that. But I was the only rider in the family. My husband liked horses, but he didn't really want to ride. He didn't really want to do the things that I wanted to do. So it was always a little bit of a juggle, you know, how can I get me time? And he didn't really appreciate the fact that I needed me time. So endurance riding was something I could do as an alternative because it was right on my doorstep. And it meant I had to go out and train every day, but it kept me very, very fit. I would ride about 10 Ks a day. And the best horses for that are Arabs or Arab crosses. So my best horse at that time was a big hunter mare that I had, and they're quite heavy, not really designed for endurance riding. So I wanted to breed. That was my first, you know, exploration into breeding. And then later, and I had a lovely filly, it was a progeny from that first one. So she was an Arab cross. And about that time we got involved in rescuing the wild animal horses when Department of Conservation were doing their roundups. And that was all pretty horrific to me. What they were doing, their reasons and logic behind it all, but worst of all, the way they did it. It was just appalling. So
can you talk a little about that so people understand, without going in the trauma of it, but just explain to everyone what they were doing and the reasons why, in your opinion, that was happening the way it was?
Yeah. Well, the Kaimanawa wild horses developed quite organically as a result mostly of, you know, people that had properties that backed onto the Kaimanawa ranges. So sometimes horses would just get loose in the ranges. Sometimes they would be turned loose, or sometimes they escaped. And there were also accounts of derailments of trains carrying horses where horses escaped into the ranges as well. So they slowly bred up over a number of years, quite a number of years, and became an actual recognized breed worldwide. They are recognized as a breed. But most of the land that they range on is also military land. So there's a conflict between the, you know, DOC managing land and the military using the land. And this whole debate arose as to why they should be controlled and their breeding. And there was a lot of debate about how many horses you need to have a viable herd. And DOC were adamant that it was only going to be X amount when the experts were saying it needed to be 2 or 3 times that amount. So in their wisdom, they started culling, and they did it by whatever means possible. I still have a photograph on my wall of one of the last bands running from the helicopter that was photographing it. And they rounded them up by helicopter. It's quite stressful. They've never been handled. They've never been near human beings before. And they're rounded up into metal, well, you could call them corrals, but yards we call them. And they're really, really knocked about. By the time the public get to see them and try and choose them, they're really battered and bruised and traumatized. So it's quite an ordeal. And every day that the auctions would go on, these horses are bundled in and out of these yards all the time. So
you decided to save some, Carolyn Rae?
Well, we started off just the first year just doing one, and she was a mare that had a foal in her when we got her. So we raised that foal, and they actually were very easy to school, you know, to bring them in and handle them. And a wild horse is interesting. It's actually easier in many ways than a domestic raised horse, you know, depending on what its background has been. But the Kaimanawas seem to have evolved into a horse that has a really pleasant nature, generally, and very responsive. So we were really encouraged by that.
You're breaking up just a little bit, Carolyn Rae. There's movement now. You had frozen for a moment. Are you there?
Yes, you froze as well.
Thank you. So. A glitch in the matrix.
So as Department of Conservation, we're wanting to increase the numbers. That just put pressure on everybody, trying desperately to save as many as possible on a market that was already flooded. So it was quite a difficult few years. So I ended up in 1 year rescuing 6. And for us on a small property, that was all we could handle. Yeah.
That's huge. And to see those animals in so much stress and trauma, what a shocking way to do it.
I know, but they're a power unto themselves. And a lot of the reasoning that we heard, you know, there were all sorts of theories being bandied around, but Forest and Bird said, oh, well, there's very precious species of plant life that the horses might eat. So we said, well, why don't, if those plants, these are plants that nobody gets to see, of course, because they're, you know, they're not on public land, they're on army land. You're not allowed to go there unless you've got a special dispensation. So nobody gets to see these plants, but they needed to be protected, apparently. So when we suggested, well, why don't those areas get fenced off to protect them? But no, that would be in the way of the tanks.
That would go over the plants, supposedly.
Yeah, like if they're going to roll over a fence, then they're obviously going to roll over a plant, you know.
Exactly.
So a lot of it just didn't make sense. It was very political. Yeah.
Wow.
And very emotive.
Very, very.
Emotive.
Can you please speak about horse whispering and equine Bowen therapy? How did this evolve for you, and what results were you experiencing through these ways of looking after horses?
I was totally captivated by this way of communicating with a horse, because really it is. It's not really what you call animal communication, but it was my first experience of using energy to work a horse. And really all you're doing is using the horse's language on the horse. You're getting inside their head, you're operating from the way that they would operate. And once they click on to that, they soon realize, you may not be a horse, but you're the leader. And then it's a process that's known as join up. So I had read about some of the old fellows who had made it more popular, people like Tom Dorrance. He had a brother, Bill Dorrance, and another man was Bill Hunt, I think his name was. And of course, they're no longer with us now, but other people have picked up on it since and made it very popular and quite well known. People like Pat Pirelli, he has developed a whole system of what he calls the 7 games, where he makes it a game where you work with a horse with nothing more than a piece of rope. You don't need a bit, a saddle or anything. And there is so much more that can happen in that relationship, because that horse has all that freedom. It's not being controlled by the way man thinks he should be controlled. He's being controlled on his terms. Monty Roberts was another one. He became quite famous because the Queen actually cottoned on to him and invited him to come and teach her, the people that worked on the staff in her stables. So that actually helped propel him into the public eye. He wrote 1 or 2 books, but he also used it on troubled youth, the same principles on troubled youth. And I would say that that's probably where equine assisted therapies got its basis from, because we use it today to help with not only troubled youth, but any troubled person. But I think that would have been one of the starting points of it.
That's fascinating.
That was like 20 or 30 years ago now. Yeah.
So much more than what we realize in nature and in souls, whether they be human or otherwise.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the equine Bowen therapy? How did that work?
About the time that my marriage was breaking up, I had it was actually before that, I beg your pardon. I actually had a bunion, and I had it operated on, and it was a very painful bunion. So I ended up, that was kind of my only option. And I got to the stage where I could only wear slippers or gumboots. So I needed to do something. So I had it operated on. It was the most incredibly painful operation I think anyone could ever have. You've got so many nerve endings in your feet.
Yes.
And to this day, I hate having, heavy pressure on that foot, just from that whole experience. But leading up to that, I heard about Bowen therapy and how it could help. So I had tried that, and I think I'd probably left my run a bit late. So I did end up having the operation. But then later on, when my marriage was breaking up, I went to stay with a friend who had a friend who was a Bowen therapist. And she recommended that I have a session with her. And because I already had this previous knowledge about using it, I thought I would try it. And it was the most unexpected result. I burst into tears. And I'd had no idea why I was crying, that I knew I needed to change things in my life. And all it does is release the blocks, but it releases the emotional ones as well. And then I discovered you can do this for horses as well. So by, having had the experience with using energy working a horse, I knew that was another way that I could be working with horses, because by this stage I had left my marriage, which meant I had to leave the property, I had to leave my horses, I had to leave everything. So there was a lot of grief about all of that. And Bowen therapy gave me a way to still have that connection with horses, even though they weren't my own. I was helping them, I was helping other people, over time, I realized a lot of people that own a horse are the ones with the problem. So you're called to work on the horse's problem, but actually most of the horse's problem is the owner.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So it got a little bit complicated at times, but it gave me a great grounding and a wonderful appreciation for the therapy itself. And I still continue using it to this day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It sounds amazing. And to be able to use something like that with an animal would add to your repertoire of how you could help them heal, how you could get them to do what you wanted them to do in a holistic way so they'd have a happier life.
Yeah, it's a way. Unfortunately, a Bowen therapist, especially an equine one, is the last person to be called. They'll usually go through a plethora of trainers, vets, whatever, before they resort to using the Bowen therapist. But when somebody does embrace it and then they get results, it's quite special.
Yes. Can you talk about your animal communication, which you have a little bit, with healing touch for canines, healing touch for equines, aromatherapy animal specialist training, and whole energy body balance training? Or some of those. You don't have to talk about all of that because that might take a week, but just whatever comes to mind that you would like to speak on, please.
So, well, healing touch, once again, is another energy medicine. It's commonly used for people, but yes, you do it for animals as well. And I've just found it a handy extra little tool that anybody, in fact, can use and learn quite simply. It's not hard to go and learn, but I found it a great little add-on, and it just gave me yet more understanding of how you can use energy on an animal. And different animals, you use slightly differently. But like birds, for example, are extremely sensitive to energy. You don't have to be close to them at all. I've had birds in my trees that I've worked on from in the house, and it's amazing. Once you realize that you can actually tune in and do that, it's actually it's available to all of us if we know how to use it, and if we trust. And that was my big issue for many years, was trusting myself that I could do that.
Yes. You have a vast understanding of animal healing, which has also involved the human energy field and body work. When did you first become interested in natural and energy medicine, and how did you originally apply this in your life?
Well, I think that goes back to those early days working horses in the round ring, and just seeing how using your own body energetically influences how they react, and respecting that space. And when you respect their space, they will start respecting your space as well. But just having had that experience probably left me open to doing more and more. But also I noticed for myself, I've got quite a sensitive system. And the best results I always found from any therapy were the gentlest ones, the ones that were the least invasive. Because even Bowen therapy can be too much for me. You do too much, I will overreact, So in anything that just involves energy medicine, I found to be the most powerful. So I was always more interested in that. So, when all those other therapies sort of got put in front of me, they were the ones that I naturally resonated to. Yeah.
Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And it's finding your path onto which modality or therapy suits you the best. And it makes sense to be that the natural therapies are a brilliant way to go, because we are natural beings, and natural therapies have always worked the best most of the time. Not saying that allopathy doesn't have its place, but generally speaking, it's the natural therapies that work in harmony with the body.
Yeah, and by that stage, I'd had a number of serious accidents where I'd experienced the medical system and how difficult that was, and trying to recover from that while you're trying to heal as well. So those gentler therapies went a long way in that healing process. And it also gave me a great understanding of how to help other people and what they may need. And just asking, learning to just ask, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
You ask their divine, their innate. Everyone has their own innate healer within. When you tap into that, you have the answers.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Can you talk about some of the natural therapy practices you qualified in and how that plays out in your life today with natural and complementary medicine, homeopathy, herbal medicine, therapeutic massage, and aromatherapy, including the raindrop technique? Now, again, you don't have to go into all of them, just those that maybe spring to mind. I can say them again if that's helpful.
Yeah, what was the first part of that question?
This one was, can you talk about some of the natural therapy practices you've qualified in and how they play out in your life today as well, or maybe what you've found the most useful?
Yeah, some of them I really delved into at the time and haven't done much with ever since. But they've all played quite an important role in who I am and how I've operated. But some of them have really stuck with me. Like I've, consistently, I never actually qualified as a homeopath, but it was part of my training. And I have an extensive range of homeopathy in my cupboard, as a result. And the same with aromatherapy. My passion for that has just continued to grow. I'm just astounded by the results I get, especially for animals. And I just love them. I've got a lot pickier and probably a lot wiser about how I choose these things now. One of the things I've had probably the longest is that I've used is light and color therapy. I have several bioptrons, so they've saved my bacon many times over the years. My first one I bought about 25 years ago, and it's still like everybody's first aid kit, so you can use it on your physical body, but because it has a color therapy option, you can use it on your energy body. They're very, very simple but powerful little tools available to anybody too, but a great little add-on in a healing practice. Yeah.
So for those people that may watch this now or later, can you talk a little bit about how bioptron works?
Yeah. So bioptron is like what they would loosely term a soft laser. A lot of people have heard of lasers because they are often used in surgical situations. They have the ability to cut and burn, and they can do amazing things with them. But this type of light therapy is the opposite end of the spectrum. So light operates on a spectrum of what they call nanometers. And the coherent laser is what the medical system uses at one end, and the incoherent, which is what the bioptron uses, is at the other end. So it is quite incoherent. So it moves very slowly, it undulates, but it has the ability to be taken up by cells in the body that are dysfunctional. And there'll be cells that aren't performing properly. There'll be cells that are injured or damaged. They'll be causing pain, sending pain messages to the brain. So the first response when they are organized is to stop sending pain messages. So that's what most people will be interested in, is like, oh yeah, this can help me with a pain issue or whatever. But they're also healing because they're reorganizing that cellular structure. They're healing. And you have the option of using color with it. These days they have advanced them even more, and now they have a filter, so you have the option of linear polarized light, which is the incoherent light, but you also have hyperlight. So the linear polarized light penetrates into the subcutaneous tissue of the body, and it's accumulative. So like an inch penetration would take about 4 minutes, for example. But now they have a hyperlight lens that you can use, powered by the same system, but it is infinite. So it kind of moves like the strand of DNA in that spiraling motion. It's like the toroid, you know, how it just kind of keeps going over. But when you, it's a little bit hard to explain, but if I showed you a little video with a visual, to look at it looks like a strand of DNA because it spirals and it penetrates into the body quite deeply, and it keeps on working like a good 10, 15 minutes or so afterwards. So the results are a lot faster and a lot more far-reaching.
Beautiful. I know that there was an elephant somewhere in New Zealand. It may have been the Auckland
Yeah, the
Zoo.
Auckland Zoo had an elephant called Kasha.
That's it.
And Kasha the elephant had big foot problems.
Yes.
And it was one of the large bioptron light models that they used on her. That was a good friend of mine that did that work.
Oh.
And he helped probably make Kasha the elephant famous, but it also helped put bioptron in the public eye as well.
So I remember it cured that problem that the elephant had, which is brilliant.
Made her life a lot more comfortable. Yeah.
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 That's wonderful. Could you please talk a little bit about your therapeutic massage and aromatherapy, including the raindrop technique?
Oh, that's just beautiful. If you ever get the opportunity, have a raindrop session. It's just using essential oils, and they're implementing a couple of techniques that were handed down, I believe, from the Hopi Indians. I might stand corrected on that one, but it's a feathering technique. So they call it raindrop because you're actually dropping the oils. Well, you're applying the oils initially to the feet and then to the spine, and you're dropping the oils down the spine and through the aura. Now the spine is the basis of our whole nervous system, and carries, and because you know good quality essential oils can cross the blood-brain barrier quite quickly. So dropping them from like head to tail is a wonderful way of accessing that bloodstream. So you would typically use 6 or 7 oils in a session. And there's a very, very gentle feathering technique where you're barely touching the skin, but it's incredibly relaxing and very powerful results due to the quality of the oils. You do have to use good quality oils. So it's a little more expensive than your usual run-of-the-mill ones, but it has quite a deep impact on the body. And I still regularly will do my feet at night if I need something to help me get to sleep. You know, I'll do my own feet. And you're just using those spinal reflexes on your feet that you would on your own body.
That is beautiful. What I love too, Carolyn Rae, is that you said you drop them through the aura.
Yeah.
And so the outer bodies are picking up the essence and the energy of the oils. And I guess with the intent being used for it coming through
Yep.
onto the body.
Yep.
That's very holistic in its empowerment, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I love that.
And you can do it for animals too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that.
And you'll know, you'll see it if you do it on a horse or a dog or whatever, but you'll see them after a little while, they'll start getting droopy eyed, they'll start yawning and licking and yeah.
One of the problems in my mind I've always had, and I've got a wacky sense of humour, so forgive me, but
Mm-hmm.
how on earth do you massage a horse?
Well, that's the thing with the raindrop technique. You don't have to massage. You're just brushing them in. You're just using the technique. You can add, if you're doing it on a person, you can still add some massage moves and incorporate them in. That's often useful to do that. But you don't actually have to. You can just rely on the oils and the technique so long as they're all brushed in. And you'll usually apply some heat afterwards, just to help them, drive into the system, keep the body warm. And people look totally different when they get off the table. They often look like they just want to go to bed, but because they're so darn relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah. But talking about a horse, do you have to sit on the horse to do
No,
that? Or
no,
how
no.
does that work?
You're just dropping it down their spine as well and around their feet. But on a horse, you're doing it around the coronet, which is where the hoof meets the fur on their legs.
Ah,
So you do each coronet and then down the spine
do you do their head at all?
a little bit. Yep, yep.
Mm. Oh, that's fascinating. Carolyn Rae, you spoke of having health issues with your head and spinal injuries. I'm very sorry to hear that. Have some of your skills helped you in healing the body, mind, and spirit? And could you speak about that time, please?
Yeah, I think a lot of my own issues have probably been great teachers, as they are for most people, um, and probably help steer me in different directions as well. So um, probably my first one in life was probably being born, because I was a forceps delivery. So you could probably class that as my first head injury. But in those days, nobody addressed them, those as injuries. It was just what happened, and you were expected to grow up and get on with it. And so I did that as best I could. But that first one, the first serious one was a compression fracture I had between my shoulder blades. And I did come through that relatively well, considering it was only medical treatment that I got, which really only amounted to painkillers and rest. The most impactful, I think, was one I had just about the time my marriage broke up. And it's very much one of those accidents that is, there's no such thing as accidents. They're just a big tap on the shoulder to get your attention, and it completely immobilized me. I lost the use of my legs, my bladder, and my bowels. So I was very incapacitated, spent a few weeks in hospital on morphine. They didn't really know what to do with me. And eventually, when I could learn to get off a bed, I had to learn how to get off a bed, and I could walk on one leg, but not two. So I could use crutches or a walking frame. And they let me go home at that stage, but I still couldn't sit down. And I couldn't really do much of anything for any length of time. So I could walk a little bit, but I was in an incredible amount of pain. And this is when I was still living in the country, and people just bought me books to read because that was about all I could do. I could only, sleep for very short amounts of time. But I had this searing, burning pain, that because I had landed on the back of my pelvis and got dragged a little bit. My feet were still in the stirrups when I'd hit the ground. So this pain used to go down one leg like it was just like somebody putting a red hot poker down my leg. And I just couldn't seem to cool it down. And somebody brought me some library books, and there was a book on visualization. And I started reading that, and that was my first experience of using visualization. I used it on myself, and I managed to cool my leg down by just simply using the technique of visualization, picturing cool running water, picturing my leg being blue instead of red hot. And that sensation subsided enough so that I could actually relax and get a bit more rest. So that was quite powerful, even though everybody just, took it with a grain of salt when I told them about it. But they weren't the ones experiencing it. I was, and that was probably what was important. So that was a good teacher. It was also the same injury that I first used the bioptron on. And by that stage, I had been walking quite well for a wee while, but still couldn't sit down for any length of time at all without getting into pain. And I went to an expo, and someone had a stand there with a bioptron, and they gave me a treatment on that injury site. And it was only a 6-minute treatment, and it took 5 days before the pain came back again.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I was pretty impressed, with just that introduction. So that was once again using, very non-invasive therapy. So
yes,
they were all little wake-up calls, and I was really feeling very much guided to like following that pathway. And that led me to, I was very inspired with using colour, which led me to learning Orasoma, which also, woke me up to all the possibilities of using, overseas psychiatrists or psychologists, shall I say, use Orasoma as a healing system for patients. And you don't hear of it happening here, unfortunately, but it does, in some circles, it does work really well, and it is utilized really well. Yeah.
That's a huge healing journey, isn't it? From having an accident where you were so incapacitated, you couldn't even get out of bed, had to learn to walk again. What a wake-up call. Oh my God. Talk about knocking on the door.
Changed my whole life. Yeah, because I really...
what a way to do it.
When they talk about, studying a naval, I was literally left to study my naval, and really had to take notice of what was happening around me in my relationship, everything, and caused me to leave everything that I thought I loved, where all my passions were, everything. But it's what I had to do to save me. I did lose a lot, but I got me back.
What was that time like for you when you left? How did you go through that process?
Oh, it was really very difficult. There was a lot of fear, but I never realized the degree of fear that I was living in until I looked at it. Yeah.
Huge change.
Yeah. One of the first things I did was the Landmark Forum. I participated in landmark education for about 4 years. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it certainly helped get me started. And
can you talk a bit about that, please? What is the Landmark Forum?
Oh, it's I think the technical term is ontology. It's the study of being, how we be as human beings, how we relate to other people as well as ourselves. And yeah, it very much gets you looking at your identity. And I was going through quite an identity crisis. It's like, who am I? Who am I really? Yeah. And it was like, then I realized how much I had been living in other people's expectations, you know, first of all, my mother's, and then I just resonated to other people that kind of duplicated that, which really didn't work.
These things are taught, aren't they?
Yep. Yeah.
They're taught from a young age,
So
and we think if we can.
finally you're pushed and you're pushed,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah. So I've found each little twist and turn as I've gone along has made me stop and listen.
Yes, absolutely. Would you care to share your experience into the world of apothecary, your passion with that field, and how that has evolved?
Well, once again, that also started on the land, in the growing of it. And my stepdaughter at the time, she was training to be a naturopath, and she came to visit, and she would always, feed me information as she was learning it, and I was very inspired by all of that. And it later did actually inspire me to start my own studying journey too. But I remember her coming. We were going around the garden sourcing different plants, and she couldn't get over the variety that I had. And because I was just so into just collecting, I hadn't actually realized what I really or appreciated what I actually had. So it wasn't
Not
till
every
later.
plant comes with an instruction book, does it?
No. It wasn't till later when I had to leave all that I realized what I actually had. I really,
yeah. Interesting.
So that sort of carried on. I can't remember the rest of that question. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. It was talking about your passion in that field. Maybe you could talk about your own product range that you put together. Excuse me.
Yep.
The influence of Juliet de Barackley. Now, I might be saying this name wrong.
It's Juliet de Barackley-Levy.
Thank you. The herbalist.
Yes.
And the impression she had on your life. If you feel you need a sip of water or a drink,
thank you.
Please,
it's a good idea. I'm getting a bit croaky. Yeah.
Yeah. Just whenever you want to take a sip, you just take a sip.
Thanks. How I met Juliet was entirely by accident. I had been doing equine bone therapy and was really looking at animal healing as a vocation, heading more down that path at that time. I'd already, was established as a massage therapist and what have you. But this was in the Waikato, and at the time, they had recently started, I can't even remember the name of it now, and I don't think it actually exists anymore, but it was like an animal healing society, for want of a better word. That's not the correct term, but they organised a conference, and it was being held at the Polytech in Hamilton. And because they had quite an established equine branch in the Polytech, they had a great big arena. So that's where they were showcasing a lot of things. So they had people there with book stands. I just went along. I just bought a day ticket and went along for the day. And I walked in this big arena, and there was all these things kind of happening around. There was somebody demonstrating acupuncture on a horse and someone doing equine massage. And there was these, as I say, these book stands and product stands and what have you dotted around. And there was also somebody there with a group of Afghan hounds, and they were working them in a circle as if it was a dog show or something. And I was a bit perplexed. I thought, well, how come there's only Afghans, no other dogs here? But they apparently were the favorite breed of Juliet's.
Oh.
And as I was sort of, just taking all this in, moving around, this group of people entered the arena at the far end, and there was this funny little lady. She came in looking she's quite a crooked little woman, and quite obviously quite elderly, but she didn't have grey hair. But she had really unruly hair and a funny little hat on, and she was a little bit bent over, and there was a lot of fuss. Everybody was crowding around her and wanting to talk to her. And eventually, and I just went over, thought, well, I want to see what's going on here. So I went over, and eventually they sat her down on some hay bales, and she just sat and told stories. She was absolutely fascinating. And I happened to have a little Walkman at the time, where do you remember Walkmans? When you
I
used to have
do.
a little tape and you could tape
Yes.
record things. And I recorded her telling these stories. Unfortunately, sadly, I lost that tape many years later. But anyway, I listened, and that's when I discovered most of these bookstalls were featuring her books. And this is who this woman was. I didn't realize who I was so enthralled with, but she completely captivated me.
Wow.
So that was my first encounter with Juliet. But she had grown up in London, I believe, early in the century, and her parents, I think, they were a Jewish family, but quite well off. And she always liked animals, loved animals. And her father often would come home from business trips, and his favorite present for her was a new puppy. But unfortunately, the puppies never lived very long.
Oh.
Because they never had any treatment for distemper. So whenever the puppy got sick, it got taken to the basement, and she was not allowed to play with it.
No.
So this troubled her, and so she said her goal in life was to become a vet so she could help animals. And she went to 2 different universities to study veterinary science. She left them both completely disillusioned because they weren't teaching her what she felt she needed to know. And she ended up leaving home and living with the gypsies. And she traveled all of Europe living with gypsies. She raised her family with the gypsies. She treated animals, treated her children, everything the way the gypsies used to, because they were the ones that had all that knowledge of folk medicine. And they were wonderful horse whisperers as well. They were like some of the original horse whisperers because
Yes,
they handled them
absolutely.
so well. But they
Yes.
knew all that medicine because they lived in nature so much.
Yes.
So she's written a number of books, all about using herbal medicine. And there's a beautiful little video put out with her. Later on, when I was studying formally, she was one of my assignments. So I did a whole presentation on Juliet. So she was my kind of hero. And, well-known herbalists like Susan Weed and others, they were all her proteges. Yeah.
Wow. What a
And
wonderful piece to do that on. How
yeah, yeah.
beautiful.
And finding, like I still had this old video, and you can actually see it on YouTube now. So it's quite easy to access now. But in those days, it was like I had this video was just like a little treasure.
I bet it was.
Yeah.
And the thing is, too, from the Rockefellers moving us away from natural forms of healing
Mm.
into the synthetics and the petrochemical debacle,
Yep.
a lot of people have lost what we should have already had and lost the old ways and lost the folk tales and the grandmother's poultices and all the rest of it. But I do think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of this is starting to come back now because we're understanding that this is the way that works mostly or better with the body than
Yep.
something synthetic.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So if you want a better understanding of where she's coming from, look her up on YouTube. The interesting thing about Juliet is I remember asking the question, how old is she? She would never tell anyone. And everyone used to say, well, she's about 80 something. And for years, all you heard was she's 80 something. I think she finally has passed over. She has a son and a daughter and one or two grandchildren, I think. So I think they kind of carried on her legacy to some degree. I'm not sure how much, but yeah.
That's beautiful. And to think that she went to live with people that gave her in a really beautiful way exactly what she needed to learn in her moving forward in her life, as if that was destined, that that had to happen for
Yeah,
her to learn
she
those
just stuck
practices.
by it. And the
Yeah.
Afghan hounds were in her terms, they were her protectors. So she always had, 1 to 3 at a time, and she always traveled with them, and they were her protectors because often she would just travel on foot. But
Wow.
she went all over the world. She went to America a lot. She wasn't just in Europe or Britain. Yeah.
What a remarkable woman.
She traveled through most of her life because and the gypsies travel too.
Yes. And you
You
got
know,
to meet her.
I know, and as she got older, lots of herbalists wanted to connect with her, and they would hold meetings that she could come and talk to them and share with
Beautiful.
them. Yeah.
Beautiful. You speak of some major influences in your life, and I know she was obviously one of them.
Mm.
Would you care to share the influence of your grandmother, please?
My grandmother, I could relate to my grandmother. Um, my my relationship with my mother was always difficult, but my grandmother she would give me the love I never got from my mother. I could always, whenever I went there, I always got a hug. And if anything was ever wrong, if I hurt myself, my mother would always say, "Oh, well, when we go to visit Nana, she'll help you." And we'd go there, and she would say, "Oh, well, we'll make a poultice for that." So I'd get a bread poultice put on my wound or something, whatever it was, whether it was genuine or not. I just loved her doing it. So she would, do all these things, and she was renowned for this. She had amazing green fingers, and ironically, we have so many similarities in our lives. Like when she was 42, she had her second child, like a space of about 17 years between the second and the first. So my aunt was born when she was about 42, and she fell through the ceiling. And she lived in, one of these big old villas in Remuera in Auckland. So, big high ceilings. And she was trying to hide Christmas presents, apparently, but fell through the ceiling and broke her back.
Oh,
Very bad, very badly. So all the years I was growing up, knowing her, she always had this bad back, and she had to be able to sit up. She had to be put into a corset, which was very rigid. They'd have to like lace her into it, and that would hold her upright and allow her to sit or anything. Otherwise, she was always on a chaise longue. Her garden was immaculate and very extensive. And if ever you went there, if she was in the garden, she was on her stomach in the
oh,
garden.
wow.
That's how she gardened. She had a huge banking that went down one side of the property, what is now the motorway. But in those days, there was no motorway. But it had a big banking, and she just put it all in flower garden. It was always a bit of a problem for her when she got to the bottom trying to get back up again. So my grandfather would often have to go looking for her, but she could grow anything. And I think that always inspired me.
Mm.
Just thinking
So
of
there was
her.
obviously something there in the family along those lines.
Yeah,
Do you think
yeah.
she first sparked your interest in
Oh, yes,
natural remedies?
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Because she, even like when she had that pregnancy, which, in those times was pretty much unheard of to be pregnant at that age. And she was determined she was going to have a healthy baby. And she got herself a juicer, Now, this is like 1929.
Wow.
I didn't even know they had juices back then, but she got one, and she used to make all these wild concoctions and expect her other daughter and husband to drink them as well, and they didn't appreciate it, but she would drink all these things to keep herself healthy, and she did. She produced a very bonny baby.
Wow,
grew,
that's
grew up very
remarkable.
healthy. Yeah.
Especially way back then too.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But oddly enough, both her daughters didn't really follow her. Like that younger daughter became a nurse, was completely immersed in the medical system. And my mother was kind of the same, really. She was good at homemaking and things like that, you know. So you'd learn those traditional things. You had to know how to cook and sew and preserve and what have you. And she had a reasonable garden, but it was nothing, no comparison to what my grandmother's was. I think it was a pretty hard act to follow, actually.
I bet it was too.
Yeah.
So you talk about another influence in your life being your dance teacher. Could you talk about your dance teacher, please?
My dance teacher tapped into something that was dormant in me, which was self-expression. In my teenage years, you know, it's when I first went to learn dancing. I learnt ballroom and Latin. I danced for medals. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I always got really good marks, gold medals, silver medals. Unfortunately, I married a non-dancer.
How did you do
And
that?
I moved away from the city, and that was the end of my dancing days.
uh,
I did try going back to it in later years when I was single again, and by that stage I had one or two head injuries, and there was a whole different terminology for everything, and I couldn't remember the steps, and I'd lost my balance as well. Yeah.
wow.
So that was a bit sad because it was that was one of my first passions, was dance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And dance is all about expression, isn't it? So you've got the
Yeah,
music
that's what I
and you've got
loved
the
about it.
movement.
Yeah,
Yeah, dance is
especially Latin. Yeah,
Latin's great.
I know. It's
Oh,
fun. It's a lot of
fantastic.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah, so you came home with all these medals as well.
yeah.
Clever girl. That's fantastic. Are you saying Poshy Cat? Makes me smile to hear lovely cat being called Poshy. How has
Poshy,
Poshy Cat been an influencer in your life?
Poshy's been one of my greatest teachers. She's 19 now, and I never ever thought she'd live to this age. She's probably in better health now than she was 5 or 10 years ago, and that's well, some of it will be due to what she's fed. She's always fed an appropriate diet, and I've used a lot of body talk and other healing methods on her over the years. But every time she has something come up, it's kind of major when it happens. It's always on a Friday when you can't get to a vet, and I'm forced to deal with it. And I have to actually get out of my emotional body, and you know, because when you're the distressed parent, you know, you don't really think very logically. And I had to get out of that and help her, and it always worked. And there would
Wow.
always be something to learn. She was always teaching me something by doing that. But at the time, I just thought, oh, she needs help. She needs help, you know. So I would have to end up being the one to help her. And I just learned so much that has happened time and time and time again. And whenever she's playing up, she's very, very vocal. She's like everything I'm not. And she makes her presence known, and she makes me tune in and listen. Still to this day, she has all her faculties. And a lot of her good health I can only put down to essential oils and the power of essential oils. So That's why I'm a great fan of the essential oils vet. I have just loved all the stuff I have learned from her and still want to do more training with her. Yeah.
So what oils would you recommend for a cat, and how would you apply them for those that I'm sure would be interested?
Well, there's not a lot of oils you can use on a cat. There are some that you do avoid, but you use them very, very sparingly for a cat. A bigger animal can handle them. Dogs can handle a lot, but a cat, her, for example, she has a little problem with constipation. So she gets 1 drop of marjoram. I just put it on my finger, rub it on her spine, and eventually she'll groom it off. That's how a cat gets dosed internally. You never give them anything internally. They just groom it off themselves. Or you can diffuse it. You always give them the option. She doesn't like a lot of it, but she knows it works. Yeah.
And what do you, I beg your pardon?
Yeah, I can keep her free of fleas. I can settle an upset tummy. If she's distressed about something, all of them, there's oils that you can, blends of oils too. And, like more, and just in the last year, probably, she grew what appeared to be a tumor on her leg. And it's quite a common area because that's often where animals get vaccinated, in the leg. And if that becomes cancerous, usually the antidote is to remove the leg. But that's not an option for me. I only will go to a vet if I absolutely have to, or if I need another opinion. But through that training with Dr. Janet Rourke, her name is, she has a blend called Kill It, and you just put a few drops on the site, the wart, the whatever the growth is, and it just slowly shrinks away. And I just discovered that little tumor, which was probably about the size of a thumbnail, has disappeared. It's never come back.
That's remarkable. That's remarkable.
Yeah. I've used them on my dog as well. They just slowly shrink away.
That's beautiful.
There's no pain, it's so simple. It's just using what nature's provided.
So what did you say the name of that oil was, or the combination of?
Oh, the blend is called Kill It.
I love that.
It's very basic. Yeah.
And where can that be purchased from, do you know?
You can't purchase it. You can purchase the oils to make it. Or, I could make up a blend for someone if they wanted it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe at the end of our wee chat, I can ask where people can get in touch with you if that's appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's
fine.
Thank
you. Yeah. Cool stuff. So getting back to a good diet for a cat, what do you suggest people who are tuning in later, or even those watching now, our lovely family, what would you suggest is a really good diet, or what to avoid for cats?
For a cat, it's a diet that's appropriate to their species. And cats are obligate carnivores, so they need meat. They don't really eat vegetables. They might lick at a few other things. They might have a bit of cream or things like that, but generally it is meat, and it's fresh meat. It's freshly killed meat. It's not loaded with preservatives. And it's not cows. You don't see little cats running down cows. They usually, if they're left to their own, you think about if they're left to their own devices, what are they going to hunt? If they go and catch a bird, they'll either eat the whole bird, or they'll just eat the head or maybe a few organs. They're the nutrient dense parts of the animal. That's what they need, and they know what they need. So using meats that are more appropriate in that way. So to get around that, I'm not one to go out and kill lots of little birds or anything. I will buy her rabbit meat or in a combination of some organ meat. But one of the products I developed was based on the use of freeze-dried organs and glands. And these formulas started off years ago when I was working in partnership with someone else. We developed a range of products for people that was based on the science of Weston A. Price. And it was using, our ancestors really valued organ meats. They were the nutrient-dense meats that healed people. The muscle meat was simply a filler. And if you just look at a lion, when a lion, the lioness usually is the one that kills, does the initial killing when they're in the hunt. But it's the male in the pride that gets first picked, and he always eats the heart first. And then they'll come, the others will come in and share, and anything left over, they may eat some of that muscle meat, or the vultures will. But it's those organ meats that they value, and they know that. So my formulas were very much based on organs and glands, but using freeze-dried organs. And then I just blended other herbs, and like there are grasses that are beneficial to cats, so you can add in other things like that. And I just use them in dried form.
It's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. For those that have dogs, what would you consider do's or don'ts for dogs?
Dogs are more versatile. They can eat a lot more vegetables. Once again, it needs to be raw and not processed. Most of the processed food, in fact, all of it, as you'll hear Janet Rourke say, people often ask her the question, what's a good kibble that you would recommend? For people that can't get raw meat, what would be a good kibble? She said there is no such thing. It is not food. It is something you put in a packet and makes some industry, some company very wealthy, but it doesn't help your cat. It'll make them dependent on it because there's flavor enhancers there, and they've coated all those little pieces of kibble with something fatty to make it taste good. And what they're really craving is that fat. Unfortunately, they're getting starches that are causing them a lot of other problems. Same for dogs. So they're well-meaning pet parents are buying them things that they think they like, but they're not actually helping their longevity. They're keeping them going, and they have to eat something. But if you have to do anything dry, then it should be just freeze-dried meat, no additives. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking about that, because I would totally agree with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You're saying your son William has had a big influence, obviously, on your life. Yeah. And you put that down as an influencer. So what have you got to tell us about your beautiful son William?
Wow. William was like, I've had someone tell me this since he passed. William was an angel, and he came here to try it out, so to speak. And it didn't end well for him, unfortunately. But everybody loved William. He, right from a little baby, he was always engaging. He's so engaging with the people around him. He was an only child, but he was a very engaging and very incredibly wise child, even, and incredibly intuitive. Even from a small child, he would say things like, "Oh, Uncle so-and-so is coming to visit us today," and we think, well, no, we don't know anything about that. We just humored him. But on more than a number of occasions, the person would turn up. he knew he was coming. And after a while, we started to take a bit of notice about this. But yeah, he was just a delightful, easy kid to have around. Yeah. And he comes back to visit in the afterlife. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank
But
you for sharing.
he changed my world, because I never thought I'd have kids. Having had to sort of feel like I always felt like I'd had to bring up my siblings, and I never wanted kids of my own. It kind of finished me for quite a number of years. But they bring their love with them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very special experience.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. I know that's really opening up your heart to speaking about him.
Yeah.
Thank you. Will you share something of your inner journey to the divine that you are through your spiritual development with the Oneness University known as ECUM, the Oneness Field with Sri Ama Bhagavan, and also with connecting to the divine universal intelligence?
Yes, well, that was quite a journey, as it is probably for most people. I first came to oneness at a very dark time in my life. I'd had a breakdown. I'd lost my son, and I'd had numerous burnouts, and was struggling with anxiety, and I never ever thought that would be a problem for me, but I was. And when I heard about the oneness blessing, a friend who was already doing it said, "Oh, you'll all that anxiety that you've been having will go away." And so I was very interested in doing that. So I followed along, and something was, I wasn't really sure for a while if I was getting anything out of it or not, but something always kept intriguing me and wanting me to look further and look further. And eventually I went to India, and India is a drastically different culture. And it's very much a culture shock when you go there. India has a wonderful way of pressing your buttons, whether it's negative or positive. You will get your buttons pressed, guaranteed. And when arriving at Acom was quite special. Like, I remember the arduous drive just from the airport to the campus where we stayed. The things I saw along the way was just mind-boggling. And it's like, yeah, I knew I was in a third world country, So when we arrived at the campus, like a lot of places there, they have big high walls surrounding the perimeter and big gates. And when the gates opened, all this energy rushed out at me. And it's like, wow, and it was just so beautiful, so peaceful, and embracing. Is like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And that was just the campus. So when we finally got to go to the temple, which was a few kilometers away, it was even more so. And the processes were pretty deep, but each time there was something profound. Alongside of it all, you don't feel very good. You're going through all sorts of cleansings, and you see other people having even more severe cleansings than you are having as well. But I struggled with the food and the heat, and but I wouldn't change it. I have no regrets whatsoever. And many of my friends have continued to go back at least once a year. They're still seeking, still growing, still developing. But for quite a number of years, it really, really resonated with me. My frequencies changed, though. It doesn't now. But as a result, I learned to connect with my divine.
Beautiful.
Whereas it was always something I thought happened outside of you, externally, until I realized, no, it's not how it is at all. But it was definitely, I have no regrets about that. It was definitely worth doing, and I may go back again. I don't know, but I'm far more drawn to other things now. Yeah. But in those days, it was only Amma and Bhagavan, and now they're much older. They've basically retired, or semi-retired. They still have a presence. They still have some influence. It's now run by their son and his wife, who is very much sought after for her own unique abilities. So yeah.
With that process, Carolyn Rae, did you find it was, apart from the clearing out, did you find it was a cathartic awakening or a gradual opening to more who you are?
I think it was gradual, yeah. Because I think I remember telling you the other day, we have a bit of a giggle when we look at photographs. The girl that I traveled with, we were terribly excited about this trip, and we were going to stop at Kuala Lumpur on the way and do some shopping and what have you. And I really thought, this was kind of part of my holiday as well. But little did I know, it's more like spiritual boot camp. It's certainly no holiday. But we took our photos, and we thought, oh, this will be the before enlightenment photo. And so we're sitting there all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, smiling at the camera. And we were going to do an after when we came back, an after enlightenment photo. We didn't do the after one. I remember my friend's daughter came to pick her up, and she was just horrified. She said, look at you. She couldn't believe how she was dressed, how she looked. We were just wrung out, absolutely wrung out and exhausted.
Wow.
And I've just noticed this over the years. Everybody that comes back, they need a lot of quiet time, a lot of processing time, and because you have a culture shock again when you come back home again, because while you're there, you're protected by all this immense energy that just cradles you. And then you've got to go back out in the real world and integrate.
Yes.
And that's another process in itself.
Yeah. Yes. Not always easy, is it?
Not easy at all.
No. You're walking in two worlds in a way.
Yeah. And India is very entrenched in their spiritual, their whole sense of ritual, the way they live. They have quite different values around a lot of things, but their spirituality is so ingrained, and it's simply not in ours, and it's grossly missing in ours. So if we could just take some of that and have it more ingrained in our own life growing up, but we just never had that experience growing up, so we missed out on something.
Yes.
But I think that's changing now.
I think that is changing now, and also maybe being brought up for some in a culture that doesn't have it to that degree, moving into it is, yes, maybe a shock, but maybe more of an awakening because it hasn't been as slowly gradual as someone living with it all the time. It's really interesting, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Could you please talk about some of your inner experiences or light bulb moments that have had a large impact on you?
Well, I remember one of them when I was in India, and I'd only been there. It was in the first week that I was there, and I wasn't feeling great. And we had this big process, and I was standing in a queue waiting to receive a blessing from this. They had all these, what they call Srimurtis, all around the perimeter. And there was some, and the Sri Murtis had a picture of Amaran Bhagavan on them. And I was not into guru worship of any kind, but some people there appeared to be, and I wasn't impressed. I couldn't understand it. I remember being really judgmental and critical as I'm standing there waiting, thinking, well, what's the big deal? He's just a bloke, even though he was being revered as a living avatar and everything. And I just remember saying quietly to myself, well, if he's that good, he better show me something, I need a bit of a sign here because I'm not impressed so far. And I had my back to what they call a mountain, because we were in this area called the Sacred Forest. And there was this big rock face behind me. And the rock face opened and he walked out, hands on hips, laughing at me. And it was just so real. I was just utterly taken aback. And I thought, I can see this. And yet I got my back to it. But I was seeing it for real. And I just thought, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I had to take a bit more notice then. And I just started to have more and more experiences like that, where I just saw things. I had these massive visualizations. I mean, everybody experiences it in different ways, but I was just having these massive visualizations. And in amongst all being in the depths of despair and pain, misery, it was a real cake mix of
Yes.
of emotions and experiences. But yeah, it was an awful lot of clearing out got done. And I think it created a great foundation.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you got back to New Zealand and you recalibrated those energies within yourself? Did you feel then that you had achieved something worthwhile?
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things the day I got back, I actually had a function to go to that evening. So I kind of had to get off the plane, try and, get myself freshened up and together and go out to this function. And everybody just said how amazing I looked. I didn't particularly feel it, but they said I looked amazing. And I thought, oh, okay, right. and then I started noticing things like you could call it my heart recalibrating. I remember waking up one morning, and this was not long after the earthquakes, this was 2012. So we were still experiencing earthquakes, quite small ones, but I was lying in bed and everything started shaking. And I just thought, oh, is this an earthquake? And I looked around and I thought, well, nothing's moving, but I'm moving. And it was me that was shaking. My body was actually shaking, and I could feel all this pounding going on. And that happened a number of times. And then I spoke to other people that were having a similar experience. So that was one of those little things. But then you just start having more and more. It's probably more like an intuition, like I'm just amazed even nowadays, you just meet somebody briefly, you have quite a brief encounter, and yet you're downloaded with that person's whole history and what's going on for them, So that's when all that started happening. And you get those moments of nothingness happening in your head, that little voice gets quietened. And then it will start up and carry on and do its thing. And then you get those moments of quietness. But that's in those days when we were doing a lot of blessings with each other. You could giving and receiving. And also, I remember sending blessings to people in other parts of the country, and they could feel it. I thought, oh, oh, something must be happening, you know. So just having that feedback every now and then really helps as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So this thing works. There must be something in it.
Yeah.
And we
one
know
one of the other light bulb moments probably was when I first learned body talk. I was when you do a body talk course, someone's demonstrating a procedure, and you're learning from observing that, and then you have to practice that procedure on each other. And I would always be putting my hand up to be the one for the demo. But after a few times, they didn't want to choose me because my reactions were so dramatic, it scared people. But one of the first ones was when we were exchanging turns to try this procedure out. And I just started shaking on the table. My eyes were rolling back in my head. I started laughing and giggling. I was going hot. I was going cold. I wanted to take all my clothes off. It's like I didn't, but I wanted to. I was taking off as much as I could. And I was just experiencing all these emotions. And in my mind's eye, I could see like lots of little bubbles running through my system. And one of the things that was being balanced was my connective tissue. And now I had like 20 odd years of chronic fatigue at this point, but something was severely getting woken up drastically. And I was experiencing it all in, hyper speed, you could call it.
Remarkable.
And it was quite remarkable. And I was having this remarkable reaction.
Wow.
Everybody was getting a little concerned, like, is she okay? And the poor girl that was working on me, she says, is this what everybody does? She was a little freaked out by it all. But no, they had to reassure this wasn't that common, but some people do have reactions like this. So I became known as, a bit dramatic in the way the results showed up. So they got a little bit wary about selecting me for demonstrations after that.
Interesting.
They were a massive healing turn points for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it really consolidated what I was doing was on the right track. And then when I had to practice at home, working on other people, I kept getting results and struggling to believe the results. But what I was struggling with was trusting myself. Yeah. And I had to keep proving it and asking the same question over and over, and the body doesn't actually like you doing that. So it was just a lot more learning. But I went on for several years trying to prove it to myself over and over and over until finally I gave up and accepted, yes, I actually can do this. And it does happen. Yeah.
Good on you.
And
because there comes a time
it was all about trusting yourself.
Yep. And you can't deny when something's working over and over.
Yeah.
And as we know, everything's working at the quantum field when you're working with energy. Yep. So even distance doesn't matter.
That's right.
It's quite fascinating subjects within this realm. Would you like to talk about what you are doing now and your goals for the future, please?
Wow, where do I start with that? Well, during the pandemic, there was a lot of focus on creating the humanitarian project, which is still very much something I want to see come to fruition, like most of us do. How or when that ever happens is still in the lap of the gods somewhat. But it's been an interesting journey doing that process. It's really made me look at where do I want to go? What am I doing now? because what I'd been doing wasn't really calling to me anymore. It wasn't spinning my wheels. I didn't want to do anything else though. So it was like, well, yeah. And then I really realized, oh, what I'm more interested in is mentoring others, maybe teaching others, but mostly mentoring others, empowering others to go on their healing journey of whatever healing field it is. And since I've become more involved now with my current business with Q Sciences, it's like, oh, I am actually doing some version of that now. I am still helping people with their health, still directing them to, fantastic products that do actually work. And it's a system that's going to work in our future, regardless of the system we've got now. They can be financially independent outside of the banking system. And it's just this great sort of family connection, a little bit like we have with our 5D family, but it's incredibly supportive. It's like, even though you're working with people that don't directly gain anything from you financially, they're sharing whatever you need, whatever help you need, they're offering help and they're there for you. It's like your success is their success, is everybody's success. We're all helping. The only way to get through this is us all helping each other. And also, I've been doing some B&B work as well on the side, and that's once again taking care of people's needs. So it's all a little like working little pathways, little steps along the way to hopefully having that big center doing what we want. And of course mine involves having equine, so I'm looking forward to having the horse I want here one day and riding the hills again, in my quiet time.
Sounds absolutely beautiful. Carolyn Rae, are you open to a few questions from our lovely family?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So, hello, Karen. How are you? Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Beautiful. And thank you, Carolyn Rae. It's not actually a question, Carolyn. I just want to say I've known you for many, many years. And listening to you tonight, I found so inspiring. And I learned a lot. So, and I feel that in conversations going forward, I'm going to be inspired to have your guidance more, especially around animals and your preparation of herbs. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this couple of hours, and so very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, dear friend. I look forward to
lovely. Thank you, Karen. Lou asks, thank you for sharing such a beautiful life with animals and nature. Healing animals creates an attachment or bond between the two. I think that's with a question mark. How do domestic animals express their love and gratitude after healing, and any special experiences? How do you approach a scared wild animal or animals for healing?
Quite a mixed bag there. So animals don't always express appreciation the way you think they would. They're not people. They do appreciate, but mostly they're like our own little spiritual helpers. They're here to teach us, to help guide us, and they present us with our lessons often. Like with my own little cat, she is a healing animal. But when she's needed healing, she will use that to her advantage to get my attention. I don't know if that makes sense, but most animals are here to help provide us with our lessons in some way. And they can be, quite simple lessons perhaps, but often they will absorb also our, like I've known many animals get sick and eventually pass away because they're absorbing the negative energies that their owners are carrying. They'll absorb the cancers, for example. And I've known numerous animals who they got cancer that really actually belonged to their owner, but they took it on. A cat tends to actually be express itself emotionally, a dog more physically. A horse, it can be a combination. Horses are very emotional too, though. Don't fret about that. They're incredibly sensitive, and they're excellent at. That's why they use them for equine-assisted therapies, because they are so good at showing you what you need to be looking at, and they'll do it in a way that you don't expect. But you do discover when you engage with them, eventually you do discover it. In the wild, you can't get up close and personal, but you can do it from a distance. And you can do it through various means, like my first encounters working with animals in that way was with healing touch and using things like body talk and Acunet systems. They were tools that I had learned that you could use with animals. But yeah, as I say, with domestic animals, it's mostly dogs and cats, but it can be any animal. I've read accounts where someone who had no pets, but they had a badger, I think it was, got into their basement and created a lot of havoc. And he couldn't understand, why he couldn't get rid of this badger, but the animal knew there was something that this person needed to know, and he was there providing the lesson. He was crossing the boundaries, for that person, and the person had to look at his boundaries. And it wasn't till he actually engaged with an animal communicator that he discovered this, and it was quite a revelation to him. So wild animals will affect us as well. And when you communicate with a species, you're communicating with a whole consciousness. And as an example, horses made a pact a very, very long time ago to serve man. And man would never have evolved to what he is today without the animals, without the horses, doing what they do for us. And they've served us. They've been our transformation. They've been our inspiration. Everything. They're incredibly noble creatures, and all they ask for is our respect, our kindness and respect. They don't always get it, unfortunately, but they'll show you if you allow them.
Thank you, Carolyn Rae. That was a beautiful, beautiful answer, and we're finding out more and more about the depth of who Carolyn Rae is, and I'm finding it quite beautiful and all-encompassing. Carolyn Rae, what do you offer people now, and where can people find you, please?
Finding me is mostly by email or text. Mostly if I do any sessions, they're distance sessions these days. And if they want to know about anything to do with the products, I can help with that too.
So this has been a fascinating evening. We've really gone down some beautiful, beautiful pathways, finding out about farming life, about horticulture, about all sorts of...
There's all sorts of avenues you can go, and there's
all
endless
sorts of
stories to
avenues.
tell as well.
All sorts of stories to tell. Carolyn Rae, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest tonight on A Cosmic Cuppa with Jude. You've been very gracious.
Thank you, Jude.
And it's been the most beautiful chat. I've so enjoyed your company and talking with you this evening. So if you are watching this on YouTube, please like, share and subscribe. And please remember, peace on earth. It starts with you. It starts with me. So good night and God bless.